Late tonight, I forgot to hit the go live button. Thank you, Radar Ashwood, for drawing my attention to it. I was chattering away here for 5 minutes and nobody had shown up. So I thought anyways. So thanks, Radar, for popping on because that was a user error. Anyways, welcome tonight, folks. For folks that are joining live, it's evening if you're on the West Coast, US, or someplace else. And nice to see those of you who are wandering into the channel. And tonight, this is Neurofeedback and Chill. Tonight, we're going to talk about a concept called Antagonistic Pleiotropy, which is an evolutionary biology, developmental biology concept that reflects a bunch of things in our bodies and our genes where some factor will have a pro health or a advantage at one point in our life or one context, and will have a disadvantage at other places in our life. And I want to really draw this parallel in developmental biology and evolutionary biology into ADHD, and the idea that, you know, the main features of ADHD, and I'll draw a handful of them out as paradoxes, they may have both benefits that they confer and disadvantages depending on context or stage of life or other aspects. So I wanted to dig into a few of those things. Hey, El Chatterino, how are you doing tonight? Laughing at my lack of turning on the live stream. We only got 5 minutes in at least. I'll clip out the first 5 minutes later on. So let me get into doing some neurofeedback, and then we'll talk about these paradoxes, these resources in ADHD that may really be sort of mixed in how they confer advantage and get in the way. Now, again, this concept is antagonistic pleiotropy. And the most common example, let me set myself up here as I'm getting ready to do some neurofeedback. The most common example of antagonistic pleiotropy is that of the telomere. These are the end cap shoelace type devices on the ends of chromosomes that shorten when you divide cells. So every time a cell divides, a somatic body cell, it shortens the cap on the chromosome, and after about 30 divisions, called the Hayflick limit, cells lose the ability to divide. And this is why we actually start to get older at that age, 20, 30 years old, because the cells have become senescent. They've lost the ability to divide as limited by the telomere. Now, this seems to have some pro-health benefit. The reason we may have telomeres is because they prevent unchecked cell growth. So the idea being that if you didn't have the telomere, then cancer could take hold much more easily. So it's an anti-cancer kind of control mechanism. But unfortunately, the lack of cell division later in life creates senescent cells that have inflammatory components and metabolites and kind of, yucky oxidized material in them. And you end up with pro-cancer fibroblasts in the skin for the same reason, because of the telomere. So early in life, it's a pro-health. Later in life, it's a bit anti-health. Now, this is a brain channel, so let's give a brain example. We know about APOE4, this carrier compound. We have two versions of the APOE4 gene, and we have APOE4 or 4.2 or 3.4 or 3.2, different versions of this gene. And having APOE4 allele, we've discovered, seems to confer benefit in young adulthood. If you have APOE4, your early innate immune system might be more robust, and you may have better memory and cognition and spatial awareness as a young adult. So it looks like the APOE4 gene is maintained because of this ability, both immune and cognitive, that it confers during your sort of reproductively active years. But having APOE4 also makes us much more likely to have that oxidative stress thing happen, where the brain tissue degrades under glycation and rusting through sugars. Often insulin resistance is part of that we call things like Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. So antagonistic pleiotropy, it's this idea that things confer benefit under one context and maybe get in the way under other contexts. Not exactly the same because it's across more people and populations, but the gene that impacts hemophilia also is like this. If you have one copy of the gene, then you are actually resistant to malaria. And so in regions where malaria is common, the gene that codes for sickle cell anemia. If you have the genes that code for sickle cell anemia, it makes you resistant to malaria, not hemophilia, sickle cell anemia. And if you have one copy of sickle cell gene, you don't have sickle cell anemia, and you're strongly resistant to malaria. But two copies give you sickle cell anemia. So it confers an advantage in sort of one dosing in this case, one gene copy, and the disadvantage comes with more than one gene copy. All right, where's my wires? I have two wires in my head, right? I do, in my ears. And I'm going to set myself up with some, I think I'm going to do a C4 protocol today, because that's the most ADHD protocol we have is C4 SMR. So I'll just do a good solid SMR today. What I'm doing is taking a silver wire and putting some paste on it, putting a dab of paste on my head over the right precentral gyrus. There we go. And then sticking the pasted up area to the pasted up wire. So El Chatarino was watching the preview image. Well, thanks for sitting and watching it. Thanks for saying something too, because I was sitting here nattering on for the first few minutes. There's in OBS, if you start the live stream, you can start the stream, but you have to also go live if you don't do it all at once. And I did that. I think I only missed about 2 live streams over the past year, and one of those times was me talking for an hour to a live stream that never started. So thank you very much for saying something. All right, so here I have a Pocket Neurobics UWiz amp, and I'm going to plug my right ear into the ground socket, which is the green socket, my left ear into the reference socket, which is the black one. Now, I broke one of my own rules here and used ear clip wires that are the same color. That makes it really hard to glance down and troubleshoot. So it's a good rule of thumb to not match the color wires on the 2 ears, and that makes it a lot easier to deal with. And then I have a scalp wire, and I'll plug that into the red socket. And then let's set up an SMR session. So SMR stands for sensory motor rhythm. A lot of neurofeedback is driven around SMR as sort of a concept. And it's one of the most useful protocols for lots and lots of goals, including ADHD and other things like that. So let me select myself. Let me plan a session. Let's see what's set up already. That's a 2-parter. Let me get rid of the second part. Delete, delete. Let me run the first part for, I'll move this over here. Actually, I don't think you can see what I'm doing. Let me move my head over. So here, ignore the fact that I'm looking away from it. So here we are with eager, and I'm going to set it up for 12. Let's do 18 minutes. Okay, 19 overshot. There we go. 18. All right. So now I should be able to just hit play or run. Let's see what happens. Let me move my head back to the... Okay, I'm going to pick a game. I'm going to use something very simple. Let's use variable.mazes today. And eager is starting up right now. Let's give it a second. There it is. Okay. Let me turn off the title. There's no reason for that. Okay, so you can see there's squiggles coming off on one side there. That's my brain waves. You can see how as I move, the wires wiggle and the wave gets less stable. So you have to sit somewhat still when doing neurofeedback. El Chatarino has a comment or a question. Outside of the central strip, is 13 to 15 hertz more of a regulatory mid-band idle rhythm, or what is it outside of the motor area? Yeah, so the question is, I think, we call it SMR when it's on the sensory motor strip, but if we're making the same frequency not on the sensory motor strip, what is its function and what is its label, right? And correct, it's not called sensory motor rhythm if it's not on the sensory motor strip. You only make SMR on the SM. You don't make it elsewhere. And so if you're seeing low beta in the low teens elsewhere, you're seeing beta. You're seeing a regular processing frequency. It might be tonic. It might come in phases or bursts or spindles, but generally seeing an active processing frequency in the low beta range. Sometimes you might be seeing fast alpha. Alpha 2 or fast alpha, which is 10 to 12, can speed up. And you can have this preparatory buzz in a tissue where the alpha is running up to 13 or even 14 hertz right before it turns into a faster beta. And this is often when someone's pushing through fatigue or inattentiveness and has to focus. You'll see the alpha speed up and then flip into beta, basically. Good question, though. So not exactly SMR, but in fact, it's really more of a beta frequency, El Chatterino. You can think of SMR functionally while it has the shape of beta, and it acts like beta in terms of how it's maintained. The function of it is a lot closer to alpha in the brain. So SMR is the alpha of the betas. It's the quiescent, it's the relaxed, it's the still version of the betas. And if you're using low beta elsewhere, then it's not a stilling, it's an actual active processing. All right, so let me kick off the session. My signals are pretty good quality. I'm just gonna hit F11 and F9 to do some auto scaling. Didn't do very much. And then F5 to begin. That's way too loud. All right. So you can probably hear the beeps. And you can see that what's happening is my little Pac-Man is zipping along. I have that purple screen with the Pac-Man on it at eye line in front of me, so it's a second monitor. And whenever my brain spends half a second, let me turn it down a little further. Whenever my brain spends half a second moving in the right direction, it lets the game run on the screen and makes a beep happen. And so my brain is noticing the stream of information. And every so often, like just now, it stops because my brain moved in the wrong direction, or maybe I added some noise to the training system by moving around too much. That'll stop it as well, as you can see. So what am I doing here? Well, I'm training these three frequencies on the screen. Next to the purple box, you can see it's labeled 4 to 7. That's theta brainwaves. So theta, 4 to 7 here, you can see that I'm making, it says average AVG. I'm making 22 microvolts of theta right now. And generally we want to train down theta for this particular SMR protocol. So what I've done is I've set a threshold. You can see here it's outlined in red. The threshold is the measurement criteria that we're going to compare the band to. So I've set a threshold at 26 microvolts above where my moment-to-moment theta is. And whenever my theta surges stronger and is out of range, you can see that there's little red lines through the trace. That means I've blown that threshold and the game is paused or slows down. And the same thing's true down here at the bottom of the screen. 22 to 34 is fast beta. And I want to train that one down, so my threshold is just above the average. And then the opposite's true here for the medium frequency beta, the SMR. So I'm making 13.9 microvolts, 14 microvolts of SMR, and I want to make more of that. So I've set my threshold measurement to stay just below where my brain is. In this case, it's 11.25 microvolts. And now whenever my brain makes bursts of SMR, it's going to be outside the lines of a green strike through it, and that's going to let the rewards pass, let the game run. And then when all three bands are in range, it's going to paint a vertical green check on the top trace, showing that my brain has just done half a second of being in range or staying in range. But again, mostly involuntary. So I'm just sitting here talking to you guys, enjoying myself, answering questions, and my brain is actually getting exercised. And I'll start feeling different in 10, 15 minutes, and I'll have a lingering after effect and different sleep tonight just from sitting here chatting and having my brain notice the beeps stopping and starting. Radar Ashwood has a question. What does beta above 15 hertz do at CZ? Nothing good is the short answer at CZ generally. We don't make a lot of tonic beta up in that range. We do make bursts of it for quick processing. But if you see larger bursts, spindles, it's usually a fairly strong anxiety. It could be pain. It could be a lack of body integration in some way, some big body issue. CZ is very body focused as an SMR area. And so you don't want to see a lot of fast beta at CZ. I have, seen people train themselves at CZ by mistake, setting up a C3 to CZ protocol in segments and have the wrong wires plugged in. And so they do the C3 15 to 18 hertz reward at CZ. And I would say I've seen that happen a handful of times. It's a pretty easy mistake to make. And I would say about 2/3 of the time, the person actually has no problem whatsoever. And they feel a little focused afterwards and they sleep great that night, suggesting that their SMR is 12 hertz or above. And every so often, someone would get a lot of, I haven't seen this, but I would expect that the side effect would be a lot of body tension, a lot of body pain if you're prone to pain, a lot of anxiety if you're prone to anxiety. So I think it could overdo. I mean, I've seen people train 12 hertz SMR at CZ and get overtrained, get overactivated. So I know that would happen at 15 hertz. I don't think I've ever seen that happen, maybe once, but you can also get good effects sometimes. So, but you would not want to bring up beta chronically, faster betas chronically at CZ, unless there was some good reason for it. Not just that yours is unusual, but you'd have to have a rationale. In this case, it would probably be about sleep maintenance, would be the most valid reason to train a faster beta up at CZ, but really that's better done at like C3 or something. It's a better frequency to go after. All right, so tonight we're talking about antagonistic pleiotropy. I talked about some of the evolutionary biology sort of concepts there, that we have this set of structures or strategies in our biology to act one way in certain contexts. And I would argue that ADHD is also like that. If ADHD was always a disadvantage, why hasn't it worked itself out in the past 100,000 years? Why is it a significant and stable percentage of the population? Maybe it's 8%, maybe it's 10 or 12. The numbers are open to interpretation, but there's a stable amount. It's kind of like left-handedness. It seems to be a thing. We aren't 100% sure why it's there, but it seems to be a thing. So with ADHD, I thought it was useful to look at some of the core features and how the brain regulates that are often considered in the way or dysregulated, and draw our attention to how they might actually support us under certain circumstances or contexts. The first one is attention, the attention paradox. And this is really the idea that ADHD is not so much a deficit of attention, but it's a lack of control over the executive function. So somebody who has a classic ADHD brain will be able to hyperfocus under intense environments or strong good or bad demands. The brain will lock in crisply and the focus will be stronger than the average person. But you put the same person in a boring environment and they're like squirrel, and the brain's looking for things to latch onto. So that strength of needing information is also a drawback of having to have information, or the brain might be looking for patterns and becoming more reactive to the outside world. In some ways, this is the core complaint of ADHD. It's the disinhibition that makes us less likely to voluntarily control and drive and sustain attention. And instead, the brain becomes much more responsive and reactive to higher stimulus and outside world stimulus. But when this is locked in on intensity, the person with ADHD can be the best athlete, creative, academic performer, business performer, and it's really quite an advantage. Radar Ashwood is asking, is there a risk of lowering SMR at CZ and it training up alpha? Let's say we reduce to 11.5 or 14.5 or 11 to 14. So what you're asking is, if we train up a slowed SMR, might we catch alpha and bring up fast alpha? And the short answer is yeah, you can do that. That tends to happen at places like PZ. So if you train C4 minus PZ, still an SMR, but you might get the fast beta to come up at PZ if you aren't careful. It doesn't usually happen like CZ minus A1 or CZ minus linked ears. You are unlikely to bring up fast beta actually, because the SMR is relatively robust and it's meant to be made in those tissues, and alpha is not a strong source in those tissues generally. So you're not as much risk for bringing up fast alpha. The one caveat is that people with strong trauma histories can have significant abreactions by training SMR at CZ, even a slowed down SMR. And for those people, I think Seaburn would suggest that maybe it's not Seaburn, but one of the classic trauma neurofeedbackers who taught a lot around eager would talk about 0 to 3 hertz being important to inhibit if there's a lot of CPTSD or developmental trauma, because for some reason, inhibiting the very, very slow brain waves while rewarding SMR at CZ does not trigger that developmental dissociative trauma phenomena. And I think the theory might be something around that tissue is so under aroused that if you train it up in the low beta range, the alpha that's just kind of hanging on for dear life might speed up. And if you inhibit very, very slow deltas, 0 to 3, you might essentially create more control, i.e. enhance the beta tone more directly. But people tolerate CZ generally really well. So even if you do the wrong protocol, the wrong frequency at CZ for that person, you can kind of tell because they're not quite as relaxed, or a sleep onset took a little longer. But generally people tolerate CZ well, and you can kind of, tune the frequency up and down 0.5 hertz until you find what, or 1/4 hertz maybe, until you find what works for the individual. Which you can see in a physical relaxing. Also, when CZ is being done at their SMR, sleep onset will be very, very good. And if you're undershooting or overshooting the frequency at CZ, then their sleep onset will be eroded or delayed. El Chatterino is asking, could ADHD or ASD in some form be observable part of the brain evolving into the front, etc., in real time? So do you mean that ADHD is a like phenotype that's on the way to something else in individuals? I don't think that's true, if that's what you mean. I do think that ADHD and ASD features are phenotypes. They're normal patterns that exist, and humans are weird. And, there are versions of both that are in the way a lot, but there's also versions of both that are just quirky. And I would argue that in that range where you're just different but not impaired, we have a tendency to pathologize things. And that's really the topic tonight, is that some of these things are actually strengths in some contexts. But help me understand, El Chatterino, if I didn't answer your question properly, please break it down again. So what's our next paradox? Let's see. The Spontaneity Paradox. Again, this is about that disinhibition. So the ability to quickly move into rapid action. I would argue that a lot of entrepreneurs would credit their success in being entrepreneurs for taking swift, decisive action, or for putting ideas together rapidly. The same is true for some of my athletes that have ADHD. Part of their athletic skill is being able to be the fastest guy on the ice or the court. Because their brain is so ADHD, they can kind of create this hair trigger responsiveness if they wish to. So that's a benefit. Let's see. Of course, the impulsivity also gets in the way. Everything from fidgetiness to interrupting conversations to pure distractibility to squirrel. That is hard, that an inability to pump the brakes, while sometimes leading you to a good place, especially under high intensity or high demand, might lead you to just an interesting, shiny object place otherwise. So it can be a little hard sometimes to manage that piece of it. El Chatterino is asking, random signaling during its random shotgun apprenticeship developing. Yeah, no, El Chatterino, I don't think that you have to worry about development because beta finishes developing very early in life. By the time you're 6 months of age, your SMR has matured into the frequency it's going to be. So unlike alpha, you don't need to worry about the maturational time course across the first 12+ years of life, where the frequency you're training will be adjusted based on the individual, but based on age as well. So betas are not like that, actually. Betas tend, especially SMR, tends to mature itself into the frequency it's going to be within 6 months of age. And to some extent, most of the other betas do. They're a little slower than robust adult frequencies, but not by a lot. So you don't really see a huge maturational change on the motor tissue in the beta frequencies, at least, across that early stage of life. So if you do see beta that's out of whack, on the SM tissue or behind the right ear to track your question about the ASD stuff. It's going to be right temporal parietal typically, not always, but often. These are features that if they're out of whack, if they're unusual, and you're seeing them that way in even a young person, they're probably built kind of weird. They're not developing into another phenomena usually, because those are tissues that will have already finished their development at that level pretty early on. All right, one more paradox, then I'll answer some more questions. So we have the high drive paradox. You'll see this in athletes. Michael Phelps could not, for the life of him, not get in trouble in classrooms growing up. Got in trouble a lot in high school. And yet his drive to be the best possible person in the water led to gold medal after gold medal. And so you'll see this in athletes a lot. A lot of my highest performing clients who are athletes come in with significant challenges around anxiety or mood or, peak performance goals or emotional access, but they rarely want to work on their ADHD because it works for them so well. And I have a client, I think he talked about this, but I'm not sure I can use his name, so I'll hold it off. And he was driving back from one of our offices, an elite athlete who was working on his little bit of anxiety, a little bit of brain fog after concussion. And he had ADHD his whole life. And he was driving back from our Los Angeles to his Orange County location after fourth or fifth session when it really kicked in for the first time. And he came back the next day and was like, it was weird. I drove home with the radio off. My thoughts were pretty chill. Things weren't busy. It was a calm ride. Didn't bother me at all because the executive function changed. And so he noticed his way of managing resources in that environment was suddenly different. But for this individual, hard charging CrossFit guy who's kind of like, pushing the boundaries at all times in all ways. He's a personal trainer. So, for him, in most of his life, be it being on a sport field or in the weight room or coaching a client or, talking to his partner about relationship stuff or trying to start his business, intense guy. In all of those modes, he was able to thrive in with his ADHD working for him. But you make him drive on the road, on the highway for 45 minutes, and he would get bored, frustrated, and angry at traffic. And he noticed that dropped away a couple weeks in a neurofeedback for the first time in a really noticeable way because he had control over that resource. So he didn't have to rely on the environment being matched to his ADHD. Instead, he could kind of flex and move away from his ADHD because it was more sort of mode appropriate or task appropriate, and it fit what he wanted to do. So that's sort of what I mean about this pleiotropy. You may have to fit your strengths into the environment and may have to sort of work to your strengths. But again, just like what I'm doing today, you can train these resources. And the person that has the really super high ADHD, but is also the best athlete, after you finish doing their neurofeedback, they're still the best athlete, the best video game player, the best artist, but they can also sit still in traffic or a boring classroom and decide to focus and have those resources show up. So neurofeedback does not rob you of the gift side of the pleiotropy. What it does is it helps you mitigate the downsides generally by giving you more of a resource tuning so you can choose how those resources operate and be less dependent on how they're biased to operate. Let's see. Castle Music, hello. Castle Music 23 has a question. What to do when you have mu and SMR overlapping? So mu is a wicket-shaped little, mu-shaped waveform on the motor strip. And it's sort of, again, like an alpha/beta combination. In this case, it's a quiescent brainwave that seems to go away when the tissue starts to activate. So mu rhythms might reflect other people's action. So mu waves may fire during mirror neuron activation. And mu waves also are used or suppressed, really. You sort of turn them off when you see movement or imagine movement. So if you moved your pinky, a mu circuit on the left should get suppressed and mu should go away. Or if you saw somebody else moving their hand, the same thing should happen. So mu is very much involved with reflecting the outside, but it's also involved with that quiescence, the same way that SMR is, the same way that alpha is. So they're all somewhat related. What I would say is that mu doesn't really train that well. You don't have to worry about it too much because it's a very low amplitude wave and doesn't generally show up in the raw signal as a high amplitude wave. So if you are training 12 to 15 and your mu overlaps it, then you're mostly not going to get a measurement of the mu as a significant contribution of the total power in that band range. So it doesn't matter all that much is the short answer. You can't really train mu with neurofeedback is my take on it. Let me stop my session here. There we go. All right, let me get myself unhooked and answer some more questions. We talked about the high drive paradox. We have one more, which is the empathy paradox. Now, the whole time I've been growing up, we've thought about ADHD as being a disorder or difficulty with regards to attention. Well, let me get some Kleenex here. Lean out of camera while I do it. There we go. And the thing about ADHD is it's not just about attention. It also has emotional and social components to it. The same disinhibition that makes somebody able to react rapidly or to notice patterns or to go squirrel will also often be a disinhibition over tissues involved with social processing or sensory processing or emotional processing. And so you end up with this kind of rawness to ADHD sometimes where you're really, really subtle at picking up other people's emotions and also, your own emotions, your own impulsivity might be a little bit big and that's noticed and that can create a relationship difference in how people work with us. And so it's kind of a combination factor where the tissue for emotional and sensory processing might be a little bit more activated. You got all the feels, but then you're a little bit quirky or impulsive or big, and that gets you treated differently, which makes you use the awareness of other people's social stuff even more. It becomes a bit of a vicious cycle. And so it's not 100% built in, but this bias towards rejection sensitivity is a thing in ADHD where this protection from essentially feeling too deeply and not being accepted is blown up and magnified. And so that's the downside. The upside is that people with ADHD tend to be ridiculously powerful, empathetic carers. And that is useful in creative endeavors as well as in healthcare professions. And I would argue that healthcare, especially like intense healthcare, emergency rooms, psych hospitals, those are great environments to work in if you're ADHD because there's a dynamic challenge set always happening. You must always kind of drink in new information. And it's really a state that people will often operate at their best level in if they have some ADHD. And so going through a 12-hour shift in a psych hospital might not be as draining for somebody with strong ADHD as somebody who doesn't have that brain that rises to that level of crisp, clear focus when they are under intense, pressure or demand. Let's see other questions. Hey, Elia, this is fascinating. I could see how this might be a therapeutic way to frame clients' challenges. Yeah, the idea is that ADHD is not a disorder. I mean, many things. If you work in QEEG, I know you Elia, work in QEEG, then we have this perspective of the brain as physiology. We show people resources within themselves that stabilize or supervise attention, that hold the internal awareness, that scan the outside world, that process the social, that process the sensory, that maintain the speed or the stability of the brain. These are physiology resources. And yes, they map to psychology and experience, but they're physiological. And if you show people their physiology, show them their ADHD in a brain map and on a performance test, I'm sure, Elia, please confirm this. I'm sure you've had this experience. You show someone the stuff they already know, their ADHD, and they're like, oh, thank you. It's real. See, I knew it. Or they're giggling, or their spouse is giggling because the spouse feels validated. It's really, really powerful to understand how you're built outside of a particular label context. And things like ADHD can be framed into this superpower stuck in becoming kryptonite, not a disease process. I mean, those resources, pre-central gyri left and right, for stabilizing attention on the left, for supervising attention on the right, these are meant to adjust lifelong. They're kind of regulatory resources, but they're also things that occur in different phenotypes. There's a lot of normal variability. Being weird is normal. And so we pathologize it when it gets in the way, or when it's a certain degree away from being different. But I would argue that ADHD can be really different. Your brain can be really different, and it can maybe not get in the way. And depending on the life, the job, the relationships, the structure you built up around yourself, maybe you're thriving. Maybe you've turned your day-to-day habits and lifestyle into things that leverage your strengths. And you have an accountant to do your taxes and a cleaner to help you, pick up after yourself, but you're able to really lean in and perform strongly where it works for you. So I encourage everyone to think about that reframing if you have some difficulty with your attention. I think it's valid and useful. All right, more questions. Castle Music is asking, what is the best way to speed up low frontal alpha peak? Couple things embedded in that question. One, I wouldn't worry about the speed of alpha in the frontal areas because the cortical alpha generators are largely parietal. So look at the speed of the alpha when someone has linked ears, eyes closed, and look at it around PZ, POZ, and OZ. Those will be the core alpha speed that someone's running at. If you're seeing slower alpha elsewhere, it may just be that the tissue itself is tired, and you'll also see slow beta or low power beta if it's a fatigue phenomena. To answer the question, though, how to speed up alpha speed of processing, etc., the best way to do it is to figure out why it's not fast enough and get other things out of the way. That game on ice, curling, where you're sweeping in front of a puck as it goes down the ice to reduce the friction. That's sort of what's happening here. With alpha, it's much, much better to figure out if something's in the way of the alpha. So you might see there's tons of theta and it's more disinhibited. Or you might see tons of beta and so it's stuck in high gear. And both of those will drag down the alpha. Or maybe there's nothing obvious related to the alpha, but the alpha speed is both dragging down and spreading out. And there's some issues with beta on the motor strip. Well, in that case, you have a sleep issue, a sleep maintenance, sleep onset issue, which is so poor that it's dragging down speed of processing, which is showing up as an alpha speed issue, but it's really about the robust nature of beta that needs to be addressed, probably at C3 or CZ in that example. So the idea is alpha is often not the culprit. It might be. Alpha specifically can be excessive or low on its own. But if it's more of a global phenomena, and frontal is an example of that, it might just be something else in the way. One caveat on that is you can get a lot of specific depression type phenomena or very low approach, low mood phenomena. If there's a blob of right front corner alpha, F4, F8, there can be those focal avoid tissues stuck in avoid mode, unable to move out of those modes. And that can happen. Sorry, not right, left, the approach system. You can see left blobs of alpha on the left as difficulty with mood. You would usually see more beta on the right or more theta on the right when that same alpha is strong on the left. And in that case, you could inhibit the alpha, and you'll get the alpha going down in amplitude and up in speed when you do that. But you're also rewarding beta in that case, generally. So it's almost never the alpha itself. There's usually something else involved. Look at other global frequencies. Look at the homotopic area that matches, F7, F8, let's say. There's usually some other reason, or systemic things like sleep issues or executive function things might be the reason that the alpha is slow. And it'll respond on its own if you do the other resources and don't put your thumb right on the alpha. Training the alpha itself is very likely to work not so well, and it tends to train up briefly and then collapse, or train down briefly and then surge back. It tends to push back. It's the central frequency in the brain in some ways, and it's heavily regulated, so it doesn't like to be manipulated the same way that the other brain waves tolerate pretty well. Other comments, Ilya is reporting that, yep, clients either see themselves in the data or they start laughing. Yep, exactly. So these are all strengths, Again, this is an evolutionary biology concept, antagonistic pleiotropy, often seen in things like telomeres or APOE or the sickle cell anemia gene, where, a gene, a feature of cells, etc., might confer a benefit in some contexts or some stages of life, and then a disadvantage later in life. I mean, even ADHD might be that. Early in life, we may have some of the same benefits that come from APOE4, and it does have an aging component. I did a live stream maybe a month ago talking about the increased risk for dementia with ADHD. And we know that that's because there's an increased iron deposit phenomena happening that causes more of that oxidative stress phenomena that occurs in diseases of aging. So we aren't exactly sure about ADHD in terms of age stuff, but there seems to be the subcomponents, attention, spontaneity, high drive, and empathy, that they're kind of superpowers. And if you can learn to take control of them, maybe they'll become superpowers long term and won't get in the way. I have seen that happen again and again, so I encourage you to learn about your brain and take good care of it. So folks, we're reaching the end of our live stream tonight. If you have other questions, please lay it on me. If you're watching this later, feel free to leave questions in the video. I come back and answer them if you have any at all, I promise. And do me a favor, support the channel by subscribing if you're not already subscribed. Like this video, find another video and like it. And if you're so called, leave a comment or two or share it out in the interwebs. The Google algorithm really loves that. So folks, take care of those brains. I will talk to you in a week or so. If you have topics or things you want to get into, please let me know. If you want to get a look at your brain, I'm doing discount brain maps. We have a $250 offer in the show notes for folks who want to get one done in our offices. And if you're already a Peak Brain client, we're giving away brain maps to your mom. So, yep, your mom. Just get her to come in or call us. Or you can call us before the end of May. And as long as we sign her up at some point, free brain map for your mom if you're already a Peak Brain person. And if you're not a Peak Brain client, you can have a discount brain map, which means you and your mom can get a membership for brain maps for the year for a total of $250. So I hope that feels useful. And I will talk to you guys all soon. Take good care of those brains. See ya.